Dora, Wickline, and Munoz. And now we're joined by Colt Barber, who broke the story on Ron Roberts and also Ronnie Wheat. Colt, this has apparently been kind of simmering. How surprised are you? This is kind of like Roberts who taught Aranda, and they, tell us what you know.
Yeah, I mean, I know about as much as you guys know in terms of the news happening today. It really kind of caught fire this morning. And obviously, this time of year, you have an end-of-the-season meetings, even though they still have a bowl game. So you have player meetings, you have end-of-the-year meetings with staff. Obviously, we saw Kyron Drones enter the portal yesterday, and you expect, as always, that's how the stuff's going to happen. But when it's a defensive coordinator that's connected to Dave Aranda the way he is, a long time, dating back many years ago to Delta State, those guys know each other. They know the ins and outs. They trust each other. And so for Dave Aranda to make a move like this is absolutely massive. And I think it just once again confirms that, at times blood is not always thicker than water or water is thicker than blood. I think you can look at it either way, and that this is a guy that he trusted and adored and loved. I mean, from every time that you've heard him talk about Dave Aranda talk about Ron Roberts, and for the fact that he essentially let him go, there might have been some mutuality to it, but I just think this was an opportunity for Dave Aranda to address something that he saw as an issue for one reason or another. Obviously, the performance on the field this year was not up to par, but I think that you can credit a lot of that to losing a lot of NFL guys off of the defense. And obviously, they had a lot of guys coming back and didn't perform up to what many believe is an appropriate standard, a standard that they set last year. And I think looking at this from our vantage point, there must have been something that just was not clicking, because one season does not define a coach, and we know Ron Roberts is a great football coach, great defensive mind, and it looks like Dave Aranda just decided that he needed to go in a different direction with his football program.
Colt, I kind of assumed that the problems that they were having were mostly not scheme, but it was execution. It was talent. It was guys not really in the right spots. But clearly there's more going on there. But also, could this be, shifting to get somebody who maybe has inroads to the talent that Dave Aranda wants?
I think that could be part of it. And no offense to Ron Roberts, I think a lot of times you want a guy leading your defense, leading one side of the ball, to be more of an X's and O's guy than let your position coaches recruit. But in this day and age, when you're battling NIL, you're battling the transfer portal, you're really battling having relationships with players. And in a place like Baylor that's going to need every advantage it can, having a defensive coordinator, for instance, that can lead not only X's and O's, but relationships. So a lot of the ways that Dave Aranda does is probably a big selling point for Baylor University, for that football program. And so I'm interested to see which direction this hire will go. Obviously, I haven't had the opportunity to wrap my head around that in the news that's coming out today. But I think that you can kind of connect the dots on some things. Obviously, like I mentioned, the performance wasn't up to snuff, and what Baylor fans even expected dating back to 2019 under Matt Rule and Phil Snow. Baylor fans have grown to see expect strong defensive performances, and they didn't get that consistently this year. There were spots, but I don't want to pin that on solely on performance, though, right? Like, I think that there's a lot to it, and I think you're right, Paul. I think that there is some aspects of saying, hey, how do we get an advantage in recruiting, and is this a move? We'll see how he addresses this hire, because a proof will be in the pudding at that point, right? If he goes in the direction of someone he trusts as an X and O's guy, or if he goes and says, hey, I'm going to find the best recruiting defensive coordinator that I can find. And they'll have some money to play around with at this point.
Colt, Ronnie Wheat, we didn't even get to know him really. I think he had like one media session back in the fall. Obviously was filling some kind of big shoes with Matthew Pilage, who's now a co-DC at Oregon. This one, to me, on the flip side to Roberts, this wasn't really a shock. Was it to you?
Yeah, I think that you saw the special teams cost Baylor a few games this year. And granted, like you said, we don't know Ronnie Wheat.
Right.
What we do know is that Dave Aranda knows Ronnie Wheat, right? He was a guy that was viewed when he was hired as a right-hand guy to Dave Aranda at LSU, and a very strong relationship. Obviously, someone we talk about a lot about trust with Dave Aranda. Does he trust you to teach the right way? And obviously he did that. So it's just another one of those feathers in the cap for Dave Aranda to fire someone that he has a good relationship with, that that it was hard for Dave Aranda to make that decision. And I think you point to performance on the field. It's hard to know if he was a strong recruiter or not. He was there for less than one calendar year, which is pretty crazy to think about, but he was, and he had big shoes to fill under Matt Pallage, and maybe you don't want to speculate too much, but maybe this is more of a special teams hire that Dave Aranda wants to address rather than a safeties position, because I think at the end of the day, Dave Aranda is going to have his fingerprints all over that defense. And if he sees something that's going wrong on the defense, he can help address it. But looking at special teams directly, maybe he's just looking at it and saying, hey, we need someone here that's going to help us win games. And obviously, special teams cost that team more than it did help them this year.
Also need to figure out maybe some of these other coaching changes. Are there others who have coached with Dave Aranda at certain places that are now out there on the market? One note about this, I know that everyone, when there's a game or a season like this, and even 2020, there are people who want blood. And it's kind of the business of fans or whatever, and even coaches. But he's now fired the two coordinators that he hired. He fired Larry Fedora. He's now fired Ron Roberts. Don't you have to also be careful at some point that you start firing all the coordinators, and if there's another season of disappointment, you look around and you're a common denominator?
Yeah, and you see that so often in college football. You have coaches who may or may not have their DNA on one side of the ball, and they're hiring and firing. We saw it at Texas for how many years of a team that tried to solve problems by hiring and firing defensive and offensive coordinators. And the good news is that Dave Aranda has his DNA. He has his backbone, right? He has that a lot of the same ways that Art Briles had his offense at Baylor. He had that to lean on when times got tough, and so I think that's a good thing. Now, you can't get in the habit of firing offensive defensive coordinators regardless, because it sets a bad precedent. But I think what it does show us, and there's a good balance to this, is that if he's going to make a tough decision, he's going to make the best decision, or what he believes is the best decision. So I'm anxious to see how he addresses this. And I think even though Baylor fans might not believe this right now, his second hire offensive coordinator is still the right one, with Jeff Grimes in the direction of that offense, even though we saw some struggles this year. And I'm not saying that Ron Roberts is the wrong hire, but I think there's potential that the second hire, Dave Aranda's second hire as a head coach for his second hire as a defensive coordinator for a defensive coordinator can be better than his first one, and for a lot of different reasons.
Colt, you were ahead of the curve, and it's not a surprise because you almost always are. Great job on this. You always wonder, again, that it's part of the business. You hate to see it. Ron Roberts was always a pretty go-to guy. But one thing I want to say, and I have said this, in fact, to a couple of people at Baylor, we don't get to know the assistant coaches. We don't get to know the coordinators. There's a little get-together that there might be, before the season. But this is a staff and Aranda's belief that once the season starts, and he's not the only one. There's a lot of coaches that do this. You shut it down. And I do wish there was more access during the season, because it allows us to maybe know a little bit more from their perspective what could be going on with a player, a group, or a productivity lack of, or if it's really good. That makes sense to you guys?
Yeah, it does. But at the same time, if they're not on the same page and those guys are out there talking and, saying what
No, I'm not saying they're going to be out there like going against the grain of what the head coach has said.
Right.
But it does. It'd be nice to be able to pick their brain a little bit during the season. Like, ask the question, and Aranda's going to give you a certain answer when it comes to Shapen or the quarterback situation. And I think it would be, again, I'm selfish. I'm being very selfish here, but I do think it would not be a bad thing if there was more access to the assistant coaches. Thank Colt. Appreciate your time. Colt Barber, 365 Sports. You don't agree with me?
No, I do. I just think that that's a whole separate thing from the top. I get what you're saying.
It would be we could ask Ron Roberts maybe once, 3 times. It's not Ron Roberts isn't going to sit there and roll his eyes and say something about the head coach. Those two, that's like almost blood, even with today's news. It would just allow us to know a little bit more. Not that it's our business, but I think it is, so we also can cover the team better and understand why something maybe didn't work. Because you're not going to always get that from a head coach. As honest as Aranda might be, and also even transparent at times.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get your point of view. It's just I'm not thinking that way. Yeah, I mean, yeah, more access would be great. I don't know, though. At the same time, there's a lot of kind of empty media sessions at time, it feels like, too. So I don't know if we'd get a ton from, those sessions per se. But, yeah, I mean, I see Oklahoma and Texas and various others who trot their coordinators out there. Tech does it. I mean, yeah, I wish that they were available, but I don't know that we'd glean, necessarily a great deal more than we already do. Maybe we would, but at the same time, I also think Aranda likes to have guys with the same message. And clearly, were you predicting Ron Roberts to go?
No.
No. Were you predicting DePaul? No. So why would he have Ron Roberts up there if clearly there's something behind the scenes? Like, that's where I'm coming from is.
But before the season began, if you knew Ron Roberts wasn't going to be your guy, then
But you didn't, though.
No.
You didn't know that at the time.
He didn't either. That's what I'm saying. That's why it would have been nice to have access. That's just me trying to maybe have a better opinion of what's happened today.
Sure. I mean, that's